Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a real legal detective story, straight from the Supreme Court. It is the fascinating case of Bahia Shipping Services versus Roberto F. Castillo. We're going to look at how a cruise ship laundryman's simple, honestly mundane act of reaching down for a table napkin sparked a massive legal battle over labor rights, maritime law, and the strict, exact definitions of workplace injuries. It's a perfect example of how the smallest everyday actions can trigger absolutely enormous consequences.
Here is the roadmap for our legal journey today. 1. The napkin incident. 2. A timely appeal. 3. Defining an accident. 4. Presumed work-related. And 5. The final verdict. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The napkin incident. A click in the back. Okay, meet Roberto. He was working as a laundryman for a cruise ship called the MS Black Watch. About 8 months into his 9-month contract, he just leaned forward to grab a table napkin sitting maybe 4 feet down in a laundry cart, and when he did, he felt a sudden, sharp click in his back.
Now, what started as just a weird click very quickly turned into severe pain. They gave him painkillers on the ship, but his condition went downhill fast, to the point where he literally could no longer stand up. He had to be sent ashore in Rostock, Germany for an emergency medical exam, and the x-rays revealed a pretty daunting diagnosis: serious degenerative end plate changes in his spine, specifically something called spondylolisthesis. Basically, his back was severely compromised.
It's crazy to think about, but that totally innocent action of reaching into a cart triggered a massive domino effect. Just a few days later, he had to disembark the ship in England and get repatriated back to the Philippines. By February, things were so bad he had to undergo a major, intense procedure called lumbar fusion surgery. And despite loads of physical therapy, an independent doctor eventually had to make a tough call. Roberto was declared permanently unfit to ever resume his sea duties. Naturally, this prompted Roberto to step up and rightfully demand his disability benefits.
Moving to Section 2, a timely appeal, the procedural hurdle. Before we get to the core labor dispute, the initial arbitration board actually ruled in favor of Roberto. The employer, Bahia Shipping, appealed that decision 14 days after receiving it. But the Court of Appeals immediately threw it out, claiming they'd missed their legal window.
Well, this is where the Supreme Court had to step in and clear things up regarding the Labor Code's timeline rules. See, the Court of Appeals thought a strict 10-day period applied to literally everything, but the Supreme Court clarified that no, the 10-day period strictly applies only when you're filing a motion for reconsideration with the arbitrators. If you're escalating an appeal up to the Court of Appeals, you actually get a 15-day window.
And he guessed it, because the employer filed their appeal exactly 14 days after receiving that initial decision, they were safely inside that 15-day limit. The Supreme Court ruled the appeal was, in fact, timely. So with that procedural roadblock totally cleared out of the way, our real legal mystery concerning Roberto's spine could actually be judged on its merits.
Section 3. Defining an accident, a legal mystery. Now, the court had to choose between two completely different legal frameworks for getting Roberto his compensation, and the whole shebang basically hinged on just one single word.
We've got to look at these two standards side by side, because the financial stakes for Roberto here were absolutely massive. Roberto's contract fell under a collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, which offers a much higher payout. But here's the catch: it strictly covers injuries resulting from an accident. The alternative was the standard employment contract, which covers general work-related injuries, but typically pays out a lot less. So Roberto argued for the higher-paying CBA, claiming the napkin incident was an accident. The employers, of course, argued it definitely wasn't.
So ask yourself this philosophical and legal question for a second. Is a degenerative back injury, triggered by reaching down into a cart for a napkin, legally considered an accident? We throw the word accident around all the time in everyday life, right? But the law requires incredible precision.
To find the answer, the Supreme Court opened up Black's Law Dictionary. An accident must be an unintended and unforeseen injurious occurrence, something that does not occur in the usual course of events. It has to be a totally fortuitous event, basically a completely unlooked-for mishap.
And this brings us to the crucial point of how the court interpreted this. Relying on past cases, the court pointed out that a snap on the back from leaning down or carrying heavy objects isn't entirely unforeseen. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that bending forward to reach for something way down low can predictably cause back strain. Because it's a known, predictable risk of that physical motion, the court decisively ruled that Roberto's click in the back was not an accident. Unfortunately, that completely ruled out his claim under the higher-paying collective bargaining agreement.
Section 4. Presumed work-related. the burden of proof.
Okay, so Roberto now had to prove his case under the standard employment contract. The new question is, does his degenerative back condition qualify as a work-related illness? Naturally, the employer confidently argued it wasn't work-related at all. They claimed it was just a natural degenerative issue caused by getting older. But right here is the absolute smoking gun of the entire case. The company's own designated physician admitted in the medical report that sure, the condition is degenerative, but it can be brought on by the wear and tear on the spine from heavy work, lifting, pulling, or pushing. The doctor explicitly wrote it could be work-related if his job involved those risk factors. Now, in an attempt to avoid paying up, the employers actually tried to argue that a laundryman on a cruise ship doesn't do any heavy lifting. Seriously? The Supreme Court easily dismantled that argument by just looking at his actual daily duties. We are talking about an entire cruise ship's worth of passenger laundry, wet, heavy tablecloths, massive piles of linens, bulky uniforms. It involves constant cleaning and physically moving heavy laundry machinery. The court found it completely ridiculous to suggest a cruise ship laundryman isn't engaged in heavy lifting or pushing. Also, the law actually heavily favors the worker in these gray areas. Under the regulations, if an illness isn't explicitly listed as an occupational disease, it carries a legal presumption of being work-related anyway. The burden of proof was entirely on the employer to prove the job didn't cause it. Because their main defense was just a weak claim that industrial laundry isn't physically demanding, they completely failed to offer real proof. So Roberto successfully cleared this hurdle. His injury was legally deemed work-related.
Which brings us to Section 5, the final verdict, timelines of disability. The court now knew for sure that Roberto had a compensable, work-related injury. But the big question was, how much was he actually owed? To figure that out, the court had to determine the extent of his disability. And in labor law, that is entirely dictated by incredibly strict timelines.
Try to picture this ticking clock in your head. When a worker is injured, the company doctor has 120 days to evaluate them and officially declare them either fit to work or permanently disabled. Now, if the worker needs more treatment, like Roberto did with his intensive fusion surgery, that period can be extended, but to a strict, hard maximum of 240 days. And here is exactly where the employer fumbled their legal obligations. Even after that maximum 240-day period of medical care, physical therapy, and evaluation completely ran out, the company doctor failed to issue a definitive assessment of Roberto's fitness to work. The law is brutally strict here. If the doctor fails to act and issue that certification within the 240-day window, the law automatically upgrades a temporary disability into a permanent and total disability. Simply because of that lapsed timeline, Roberto's disability was categorized under Section 32 of the standard terms. A permanent total disability is strictly classified at the absolute highest level, which is Grade 1.
And under the specific rules that applied at the time Roberto originally contracted his illness, a Grade 1 disability carries a legally mandated base compensation rate of $50,000.
But wait, we're not quite done with the math yet. The amended standard terms and conditions from the year 2000 dictate a specific multiplier for computing this exact benefit. That multiplier is set at 120%.
Multiply those out, and we arrive at the final calculated award. The Supreme Court ordered the employers to jointly and severally pay Roberto $60,000. Plus, because he was forced to spend time and money litigating just to get the benefits he was rightfully owed in the first place, the court slapped on a 10% attorney's fees award to the total. This brought Roberto's long, exhausting legal battle, a battle that literally started with just reaching for a napkin, to a truly victorious and just close. We've just seen firsthand how a single click in the back can unravel this crazy maze of procedural deadlines, strict dictionary definitions, and high-stakes medical countdowns. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Does your workplace contract protect you when the timeline runs out? Or will you have to fight tooth and nail for your 240th day? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. And remember, always read the fine print in your own agreements.